My name is Elena, and I have been a volunteer at the city zoo for over 7 years now. I've worked with all kinds of animals, from tiny finches to massive elephants, but nothing quite prepared me for the day Razor arrived. The day a crocodile named Razor was found in a pile of garbage. It's a story that has stayed with me ever since, and I want to tell you about how a creature so fierce and wild ended up in a place so unnatural, and how he slowly began a new life under our care. It all started on a sweltering afternoon in late August. I was working my usual shift when the zoo director came rushing in, looking unusually grave. "Elena, we have a situation," she said, her voice low but urgent. "A crocodile has been found dumped in a heap of trash on the outskirts of town. The animal control officers brought him here. We need your help with his care." I was stunned. A crocodile? In the middle of the city, abandoned and thrown away like garbage? It sounded impossible, yet here I was, about to meet one. The story behind Razor was as heartbreaking as it was shocking. According to animal control reports, a man had kept the crocodile as a pet for years. At first, he treated Razor almost like a child, feeding him, cleaning his enclosure, even taking him on rare drives in the back of a truck. But as the crocodile grew, so did the owner's neglect. Razor's natural instincts and sheer size became too much to handle, and instead of seeking help or a new home, the man made a cruel decision. One night, he loaded Razor into a large garbage bin with some discarded food scraps and drove to a remote area on the edge of town. Then, without a second thought, he left the bin in a dumping ground, hoping no one would ever find the animal. When animal control officers discovered Razor, he was barely alive. The smell of decay and rot filled the air around the garbage heap, and the crocodile was weak and dehydrated. His scales were dull, and his eyes, usually so sharp and watchful, seemed dim and tired. It was clear he had suffered both physically and emotionally. To see a creature that had once roamed vast rivers, strong and fierce, reduced to such a pitiful state was almost too much to bear. At the zoo, preparations had to be made quickly. Crocodiles are not like other animals. They require specialized care, strict temperature controls, and the right environment to start healing. The veterinary team worked overnight to stabilize him, and by morning, I was invited to observe and assist in his first moments at the zoo. I still remember walking into the new exhibit space that was hastily prepared for him. It was a large aquatic habitat, designed to mimic a natural riverbank with deep pools, shaded areas, and plenty of room to swim. But Razor didn't move much at first. He lay quietly, almost as if he didn't quite understand where he was or why he was there. Over the next few days, I visited him several times a day. I was the one assigned to monitor his adaptation, to watch his behavior, note his eating habits, and ensure his environment suited his needs. At first, he refused to eat. His distrust of humans was palpable, understandable after the betrayal he had suffered. But slowly, as the days passed, Razor began to respond to the quiet presence of a caregiver. I remember the first time he opened his eyes fully and tracked my movements across the pool. It was a small victory but a significant one. That moment felt like the first crack in the wall of fear and pain he had built around himself. Razor's recovery was not just physical, it was mental and emotional. Crocodiles, despite their reputation, are intelligent and capable of complex responses to trauma. I spent hours sitting by his enclosure, speaking softly, sometimes just sitting in silence. I learned to recognize his moods, when he was calm, when he was agitated, and when he felt safe enough to explore his new surroundings. But there was still a long road ahead. The scars of abandonment don't heal quickly. Razor had to relearn how to trust humans, how to thrive in a new environment, and how to reclaim his strength. What had caused the man to give up on such a magnificent creature? Was it ignorance, fear, or simple cruelty? These questions lingered in my mind, but what mattered most was giving Razor a chance at a better life. This was just the beginning of Razor's journey, from a discarded pet to a symbol of resilience and hope. I will tell you about the challenges he faced next, and how he slowly became the proud, powerful crocodile he was meant to be. The days that followed Razor's arrival were some of the most challenging I've ever experienced as a volunteer. His fragile state demanded constant attention, yet I knew that rushing his recovery could do more harm than good. Healing, I learned, needed patience, both from me and from Razor himself. Initially, Razor stayed in the shallow end of his pool, barely moving except to flick his tail occasionally. He was wary of everything: the sounds of the zoo, the footsteps of visitors, even the gentle tapping of my fingers against the glass. He had lived in confinement before, but never like this, in an environment where he could swim freely, bask in the sun, and dive beneath the water. Yet freedom was new and confusing for him. His diet was another hurdle. Razor had been fed inappropriate food before, mostly scraps and leftovers that were far from what a crocodile needs to stay healthy. Here at the zoo, our veterinarians prepared a diet rich in fish, poultry, and specially formulated supplements to restore his nutrition. But for several days, Razor refused to eat. He would stare at the food, then turn away. One morning, after nearly a week without proper feeding, I found him resting near the water's edge, eyes half closed but alert. I carefully placed a small piece of fish on the rocky bank, stepping back to give him space. To my amazement, he slowly slid forward and took it gently from the water's surface. It was a small step, but a crucial one. From that day on, he started eating a little more each day. Watching Razor eat was like witnessing a breakthrough. It was clear he was regaining his strength, but more importantly, he was beginning to accept his new home and the people who cared for him. I remember how his eyes, once dull and tired, started to gleam with life. The powerful jaws that could crush bones were now opening calmly, taking food without hesitation. But Razor's transformation wasn't just about eating or moving. It was about adapting his behavior to an environment so different from the garbage heap where he was found. Over the next several weeks, I observed subtle changes. He became more active, patrolling the edges of his enclosure with the slow, deliberate movements characteristic of wild crocodiles. Sometimes, he would linger beneath the water, only his eyes and nostrils breaking the surface, a perfect camouflage that spoke of his survival instincts. Despite this progress, there were moments when the past trauma seemed to resurface. Loud noises startled him, unfamiliar visitors made him tense. On one occasion, a sudden shadow passing overhead caused him to retreat into a corner of the pool for hours. These moments reminded me that trust would not come easily. To help with this, the zoo staff made adjustments to minimize stress. We limited visitor access near his habitat during the first few months, installed quieter water filtration systems, and kept the lighting natural. I spent extra time near him, often just sitting quietly, letting him know I was there but not a threat. Over time, he began to respond, not with aggression or fear, but with curiosity. One afternoon, I brought a long stick with a piece of cloth tied to the end, a simple enrichment tool designed to stimulate his natural hunting instincts without causing harm. Razor eyed it cautiously at first. Then, slowly, he moved closer, eyes locked on the moving object. With a sudden burst, he snapped at the cloth, missing at first, then getting it on the second try. The satisfaction in that moment was palpable. Here was a crocodile reconnecting with his instincts, starting to thrive. Razor's growing strength and confidence were a source of hope for all of us. But I couldn't help but think of how different his life might have been if his owner had made a different choice. If Razor had been taken to a sanctuary or handed over to professionals instead of being abandoned in that pile of garbage. One day, while monitoring him, I caught a glimpse of what I believe was his personality shining through. He wasn't just an animal recovering from neglect, he was an individual with resilience and spirit. His sharp eyes followed my every move with something I can only describe as recognition. It was as if he knew that, despite everything, he was safe now. By the end of those first few months, Razor's aquatic exhibit was no longer just a place of recovery but a home. He had grown visibly, his scales smoother, his movements stronger, and his behavior more natural. He was becoming the crocodile he was meant to be, and it was a privilege to witness that transformation. There were still many challenges ahead. Razor's past had left scars that would take time to fully heal, and his future would require ongoing care and patience. But the story of this abandoned crocodile was far from over. In the final part, I will share how Razor settled into his new life at the zoo, the bonds he formed with the team, and how his presence has changed the way we understand these magnificent reptiles. Months passed since Razor's arrival, and the transformation I witnessed was nothing short of remarkable. What began as a fragile, wary crocodile slowly turned into a confident, powerful creature who seemed at home in his aquatic kingdom. The journey was long and filled with obstacles, but every small victory reminded me why we do this work, to give animals like Razor a second chance. By now, Razor's daily routine was well established. He greeted the morning sun by basking on the warm rocks, then slid gracefully into the water to patrol his territory. His scales shimmered in the light, a vivid reminder of his strength and resilience. He had gained weight, and his movements became more fluid and purposeful. But beyond the physical changes, the most profound shift was in his demeanor. I still remember the moment it became clear Razor had accepted the humans around him. One afternoon, I was at the enclosure, carefully cleaning the perimeter when I noticed him swimming close to the glass. Our eyes met, his sharp, calculating gaze locking with mine. Instead of retreating or acting defensive, he held my stare for a long moment. It was almost as if he was acknowledging the care and patience that had gone into his recovery. I felt a deep connection then, the fragile thread of trust that had been slowly woven. The zoo staff had worked tirelessly to provide an environment that stimulated Razor's natural behaviors. We installed submerged logs for him to rest on, varied the water depth to encourage diving, and introduced enrichment activities to keep his mind engaged. Razor thrived in these conditions, displaying hunting-like behaviors during feeding times and even showing signs of playfulness, a trait often overlooked in crocodilians. The public's response to Razor's story was overwhelming. Once news spread that the crocodile found in a garbage dump was now living healthily at the zoo, people from all over came to visit. Many expressed surprise that such a fierce animal could show signs of recovery and adaptability. We received letters from children, local schools requested educational tours, and conservation groups praised the zoo's efforts. Razor had become more than just a rescued animal, he was a symbol of hope and resilience. But perhaps the most rewarding part of this experience was witnessing how Razor changed the perceptions of those around him. Crocodiles often inspire fear and misunderstanding, seen as dangerous monsters rather than complex creatures with their own needs and emotions. Through Razor's journey, we were able to educate visitors about the importance of respecting wildlife, the dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets, and the critical role zoos play in conservation and rehabilitation. Behind the scenes, our team kept a close eye on Razor's health and behavior. Regular veterinary checkups showed continued improvement. His scales were now glossy, and his eyes bright. He responded well to handling during necessary medical procedures, a testament to the trust he had developed with his caregivers. Yet, I always reminded myself and others that Razor's story was also a cautionary tale. The cruelty of abandonment and neglect still looms large. The man who dumped Razor had no idea the chain of suffering he triggered, not just for the crocodile, but for the people who had to rescue and care for him. It is a reminder of the responsibilities humans carry when dealing with wild animals, and the devastating consequences when those responsibilities are ignored. Today, Razor lives in a large, carefully maintained aquatic exhibit that mimics his natural habitat as closely as possible. Visitors can watch him bask, swim, and interact with his environment, gaining insight into the life of a magnificent reptile. As for me, continuing to monitor his adaptation has been a privilege and a lesson in patience, resilience, and hope. The story of Razor the crocodile is one of tragedy turned into triumph, of neglect met with compassion, and of survival against the odds. It is a real story, not fantasy, and one that reminds us that every animal, no matter how fierce or wild, deserves a chance at a life filled with dignity and care. I am grateful to have been a part of Razor's journey, and I hope his story inspires others to advocate for the welfare of all creatures, great and small.